it turns out the ACC might not die. And the reason why is not exactly what you'd think. It's not that they're going to retain Florida State. They're not. It's not that they're going to retain Clemson. I still don't think they will. But the point here is the death of the ACC as we know it isn't the death of the ACC overall, because I do believe that Jim Phillips and company are in a better spot to retain some of the teams. Unlike the Pac-12 where everybody jumps ship, what if Boston College has no better option and they stay put? What if Cal says, yeah, obviously we have no better option. What if they stay put? And more than anything, Oregon State and Washington State are begging for a landing spot. And what is better than the Mountain West? The ACC. Even if the ACC loses members like Clemson, Louisville, Pitt, Florida State, Miami, they can backfill. North Carolina, I think North Carolina State is where we should be focusing our attention, even Virginia Tech. After Florida State, it's those four schools that I believe are going to champion getting out of the ACC. How will Jim Phillips and that conference respond? They've already told you they're going to go get other schools. The Pac-12 sat on its laurels. Remember, George Kliavkoff said, I don't know if I'm shopping there yet about the Big 12. Well, he's fired now. I don't think the ACC is going to do that. They're not going to play cocky. They're going to call other schools across the country and say, jump on board. This is from Jim Phillips. Jim says that he believes the ACC, who already has Stanford, who already has Cal, will go after Tulane. Yeah. We'll go after USF. Not a bad brand. That conference, instead of accepting death, will go after Washington State and Oregon State, as well as a Memphis, because it's inevitable at this point that Florida State will leave. Clemson will want to follow. UNC will be out the door too. And I am confident at this point, from what I've heard and what we've seen out of the ACC, that there's no way that if Pitt gets the opportunity to go to the Big 12, which I think they could, that they stay put in the ACC. There is no way that if Virginia Tech and NC State want to champion their way out of that conference, and they know they might be tied to UNC and Virginia, that they won't try to figure out a way to finagle into the Big 10. That's a real possibility. And if they can't go to the Big 10, then the Big 12 is sitting there waiting for them. Now, I know we've let lawmakers get all intertwined in this, and that's not a great thing. But at this point, I still believe those schools will do whatever they can. UNC, namely, will do whatever it can to get to the Big 10, to get out of the ACC, even if that's what the Big 12 is. So at this point, understanding the ACC is going to lose the bulk of its major brands, understanding the Big 12 is going to get multiple ACC brands, they're just going to create a mid-major conference. Now, it won't be the worst mid-major conference. Like, the AAC is not a bad thing. It'll effectively be a merger with those teams coming over, and you'll still have Boston College, which is not a good brand, but you'll also have Duke, who is. And Washington State, who can carry their own. And when you have a Western basis, or a Georgia Tech, who I've heard people mutter will be in the Big 12, when you have a Georgia Tech hanging around there, you can still survive off of that. If you're able to go out and get Memphis, now you're talking, hey, we know the SEC and the Big 10, especially if UNC or Florida State are in one of those two, are the top of the top. We're already having conversations about the college football playoff ostracizing the ACC and the Big 12 because they are tier 2 conferences. We all know, based on money, based on brands, the Big 12 is sitting behind the SEC and the Big 10. I don't think the Big 12 is in a bad spot. I think, frankly, they're in a great spot. And I do believe it's one of the most fun and competitive conferences in college football because football pushes the needle, and that won't go away. However, now we're talking 3 tiers. We're talking Big 10, SEC. Hey, here's a really good spot to be in as the Big 12, especially if you're a recruit. Think about who's this the most important for when it comes to sustaining success across the broad spectrum of college football. It is recruiting, right? Nobody wants to be like, oh, I can't wait to play in the Sun Belt when you have the opportunity to play in the SEC. Does that make sense to you? That's why the Big 12 needs to stay relevant to still get big recruits. If it's those two conferences and the Big 12 is not that far behind, I'm okay with that because we're already kind of sitting right there. What is going to help this league is when the ACC, half of the ACC teams say we're leaving, and then the Big 12 takes what they want or what they can get from that half, and the ACC backfills with AAC teams like a Memphis, like a USF. At that point, then we've got the 3 tiers of, hey, Big 10, SEC, you get to be up there. That's fine. You guys can be the big dogs. The Big 12 is not that far behind. You're sitting in 3rd place. And then there's a nice sizable gap between the Big 12 and an ACC that is anchored by Washington State, Oregon State, Georgia Tech, maybe Duke, Cal, Boston College, UConn, USF, Syracuse, SMU. That's fine and dandy. Yeah. That's not the ACC dying entirely would kind of suck. I know that I dance on the grave, and it'd be great for the Big 12 to get a couple of their brands. But what if the ACC is able to stay together because they bring in other teams from the AAC, other teams from the mid-major ranks, a Tulane, and survive? I think that's great because it gives now Tulane, it gives now Washington State and Oregon State an opportunity to compete year in and year out at a pretty high level of college football. That, to me, is good for the game. If we stay at a Power 4, where now every conference has hovering around 20 teams, looking at 80 teams that are in power conferences, 80 teams that get to stay remotely relevant, and we all know there's still a gap between the ACC and the Big 12, and a gap between the Big 12, the SEC, and the Big 10. That is fine. Because now 80 teams get to consider themselves power brands in football, right? Like right now, Boston College gets to consider itself a power brand in football because it's in the same conference as Florida State. You know, like I don't want that to die. I want there to still be those schools. I went to one, Baylor. I want those schools to still have a say in college football, despite not being as big as Ohio State. And Jim Williams might be onto something. The ACC might not die altogether. It's just going to look a whole lot different in 2 years than it does today. The Big 12, on the other hand, is going to look different in a good way. We don't have to backfill. We get to pick. We get to pick and choose. Yay. We're power brand. Tomorrow, boy, when I tell you I am fired up for tomorrow's show. One of the coolest guests that we've probably ever had on this very program is joining, and you're not going to want to miss it too. It is Cole Adams, who's gone viral on Twitter 1 gabillion times for posting the funniest stuff about Nickelodeon and March. He's the guy that deleted Tinder, and he deleted Hinge because it's March. He joins the show. This has been It Always Will Be. Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. I'm still not wearing pants. Dose Grande.